In today's EOC tutorial, you're going to look at the genre of literary nonfiction, one of the areas of the STAR test that may show up on the reading section. So we want to look at some key things to look at, what you need to think about when you recognize a memoir on the test. So today we'll be looking at a piece that you have in front of you, written by Mark Twain back in the early 1800s before he became a popular novelist. He lived in the Old West around the Comstock Lode, where he was able to be a part of the silver mining industry and the boom that took place in Carson City. So what you read today, that's a little bit of background for him. He was working in a newspaper there to report on all the new finding of silver in Nevada. So when we look at literary nonfiction, we want to make sure literary nonfiction that you're looking at what you need to know. So the word literary in this case means that you're reading a story. So like any other short story that you might read, this is going to have a plot. So you're going to look at the events and the order that they take place in, just like you would when you read a normal story. You're going to pay special attention to the setting, the place, or the time that it happens. And in this case, with a memoir, you're always going to be in the past tense because the author is telling you about an event in his or her life that has already happened. You're also going to have characters, and the narrator will be part of those characters, so it's always going to be told in the first person, so you'll see words like I or me or we. Finally, one of the things that you're going to notice in a literary nonfiction piece is there's dialogue, just like there would be in a short story or a novel. Characters will talk to each other like they are in a story. And then finally, like you do in a short story or novel, you're going to look for the conflict. What is the main problem that these characters are going to have to overcome? So what makes this a literary nonfiction piece is that each event that you're reading about actually happened. It's factual and they're real events. So you have to think of it as there's main ideas that the author will present to you, the reader, that you're going to have to track throughout the story. Next, we're going to look at the tone. Tone are the words that the author uses to show what he or she is feeling about the events that they lived. So we'll point out what kind of words they use so that you know that the person that wrote it is the person that's actually feeling the emotions from what's going on in the story. Just like any other piece of literature that you read, there's going to be figurative language with similes and metaphors and imagery. So make sure that you're marking those like we do in the text. And then finally, the last thing you want to think about is a theme, a broad, something broad from the text that is true universally. So we'll talk about that as well. So take a minute with your teacher to look at these, make sure you understand the vocabulary words on each one of these slides, and make sure you understand that you're reading a story with plot and setting and characters, and the characters are going to talk to each other. But remember that this really happened to the person that's writing it. It's a factual, real event. What the literary side of it is with a story, and the nonfiction side of a fact and a theme that can be taught universally to everyone. So be sure you sit down and talk about your teacher with this, answer those questions, and he or she will go over the answers with you to make you feel a bit more confident about this genre, which is called. What you do when you read this story is you want to answer a couple of questions to yourself. So there is going to be a storytelling, and it's going to feel like a chronological, this happened first, and this happened, and this happened. You're going to feel like you're understanding each event, but you're also going to want to ask yourself, what's the bigger idea about life that this person is talking about? So even though the author is telling about an event that happened in his or her life personally, it's something that they want to teach you, the reader, that could happen in your life as well. So you want to make sure you make that connection between what you're reading and the storytelling and the bigger idea that you could apply to your own life or someone else that you might know. The second thing you want to look at is answering what's the author's message, or what's the reason for him writing about this memory. Of course, it's going to be pretty exciting. There's going to be some sort of conflict that they're going to have to overcome, and you're going to get a good answer to the question of why they chose this memory, but you want to look at what message are they trying to send you, the reader, about why they picked this particular memory to write about. So as you read, you're going to look for and you're going to find words that can help you create a feeling about the big idea. Something that you can say, hey, I know this person went through this a long time ago, but I also would feel this way if I were going through something like it in my life. Finally, figure out what the author is saying is more than what's written. They're going to leave holes for you to fill in, for you to figure out. Some of the main ideas will stand out pretty easily. You'll be able to go, yes, this story is about A, B, and C, but in between A, B, and C, there's going to be little holes for you to figure out, and we call that inferencing. Things that you take the information that the author gives you, and you try to figure out what's being said in between the lines as you read. So with your teacher, be sure you talk about the approach that you're going to have when you sit down to read a memoir, so that you can answer, what is the story telling me? What is the bigger idea about the story? How is the author using the right words for me to feel a certain way? And what is the big idea that I need to relate to my own life? Okay, so take a moment now and go ahead and read through the story or the memoir by Mark Twain, and make sure you understand that we'll be marking this up in sections, but I want you to read through the whole thing right now. So take a few minutes to read that before we get started to the next slide. Okay, now that you've read the memoir and you've got a general idea of what it's about, you understand that this is about a group of people. Mark Twain himself is on this mountain, and they are trying to get back to Carson City. But the problem is, with all the snowfall and basically a blizzard comes, it covers up all the tracks, so they have to find their own path to get back to Carson City. So automatically you can see a conflict involved. So what we want to do is look at each part of this in a section. So you see the picture there. So what I want you to do is go ahead and mark your text like I have in the picture. So I want to give you some time to go ahead and do that. And the colors aren't really all that important. Just make sure you underline what I have underlined. So take a few minutes to mark out that first section on your text to make it look like the picture that you see on the PowerPoint. All right, now that you've done that, we want to make sure that you understand and are able to answer questions about the plot, the setting, the characters, and the conflict. You want to treat the memoir like a story or a novel or a short story that you've read, and understand who's who, where they are, and what they're trying to do. So take a minute and talk with your teacher about those questions that are bullet points there, and let's try to figure those things out before we move on. Okay, now that you've had a second to look through and mark the text, you can see where what we marked will help you answer these questions over here. So you can go through that the characters are on a mountainside, they're on horseback, and they're trying to find their way back to Carson City. And the problem is that it snowed so much. But the good thing is there's a man there, and his last name is Ollendorf. And he says that he is a perfect, he's like got a perfect compass inside of his head, and he can track his way back to Carson City with no problem. So at this point in time, we want to talk about the author's feeling at this moment, and make sure that that you understand how the group would feel in this moment. So take a look at those words that are underlined in blue. It says that Ollendorf had any compass and that he could strike a beeline for Carson City. A beeline would be a straight path, and they get there very quickly. So he's trying to set the mind of his travelers at ease. And at this point, they said that they are happy and content, and they poke along, and they are trying to come across a fresh trail in the snow. So words like happy and content and poked along, that's letting you know that these guys are relaxed, they feel confident, and they're ready to move on, and they don't think they're going to have much of a problem at all. And the last part of this section here, we want to look at the dialogue. We mentioned that a memoir is going to have dialogue just like a short story would. So look at what the author says. It says, I knew I was dead certain as a compass, boys. Here we are, writing somebody's tracks that will hunt the way for us without any trouble. Let's hurry up and join the company with the party. So you hear this man talking, and it gives you an idea a little bit more about his character and about the confidence that they have. So right now, I want you to talk with your teacher, maybe 2 words that would describe the tone of section 1. What are 2 words that would describe the tone of section 1? Hopefully you've come up with they feel confident, they're relaxed, maybe another word that you could use. They are feeling like this is not going to be a big deal for them. Okay, so go on and let's go to the next slide. And we look at section 2. I'm going to give you a second here. We're going to get some more information because there's going to be a change in the story, and that's where our conflict's going to come in. So take a minute to mark your text like I have here, underlining what I have. Okay, now that you've had a chance to mark your text, we want to answer these questions here with your teacher. What has changed in the story? How does the author's words change the tone or the author's feeling of what's going on now that troubles come into play? And again, what tool does he use to give us insight into what these characters are thinking or what they are feeling? So go ahead and answer these questions with your teacher. Okay, now that you've done that, you should notice that in this section 2, the change is that they've been walking around in a circle, and each time they come across tracks, they think they're finding more tracks from more soldiers who are already tracking their way to Carson City. But then they realize that they've just been walking in a big circle, and the tracks they find are their own. So you see that the change is that now they're lost. They have a problem. They're up on a mountain in a blizzard and they're lost. So you can see the conflict comes along and you see words change. Okay, you see, like I have underlined there in purple, we hurried along, and at the end of an hour, the tracks still looked newer and fresher. But what surprised us was that the number of travelers in advance of us had seemed to steadily increase. And they talk about the word solitude. Now they jogged along a little faster. It says down there that they were circussing round and round in a blind desert. Big change in words and feeling from the first section when they were happy, content, and poked along. Now they're in a hurry. There's a little bit of panic, and they're jogging a little faster because they realize that they're basically lost in a blind desert. So talk a minute with your teacher about what a blind desert might do or might cause panic in someone that's lost in a blind desert. Okay, also notice that dialogue in this section as well. And this is another person talking. We don't have this character's name, but it says, boys, these are our own tracks, and we've actually been circussing round and round in a circle for more than 2 hours out here in this blind desert. By George, this is perfectly hydraulic. So you hear sarcasm now in this person talking, and they're probably not too happy with our character Ollendorf up there, who said that I know I can lead the way. Well, we've just proved that this man is wrong. So we definitely have a conflict and a problem going on. And when we look at section 3, and I'm going to give you a second to mark that like I have up here, I want you to notice the change in the way the men treat each other. So go ahead and read this section and mark what I have marked, and look at the questions. What shift in focus happens in this paragraph? How are the details providing hints about the actions in the story? And what's changed about the tone again? So take a moment to talk about those words with your teacher and mark what I have marked in section 3. All right, so what shift in focus has happened in this paragraph? Well, in paragraph number 5, we see a not so sweet and happy, content group anymore. They use the words abusive, they call each other all manners of hard names, and they have that word venomous in there, meaning that there's been something's been poisoned among the group. They're not very happy with Ollendorf getting them lost. So much so that one person, they call him the young Swede, landed in his canoe and took off walking, and he's singing a song here. He sings about his sister and his brother and the child in the grave with his mother. And the man just kind of walks off into the snow, and eventually he can't be seen anymore. And they say they never see him again. It's like he was just sucked up by the blizzard, and we can make the assumption here that he dies. Okay, so we've got a big change from the beginning of our story to right here. So one thing we notice here is the shift and the focus goes from the entire group, and now in this particular section they focused on one man himself, the young Swede. And ask your teacher about foreshadowing here with the song that the young Swede is singing about a sister and a brother and someone in a grave with his mother. Ask your teacher what foreshadowing is and how the author might be giving us a hint that the young Swede himself is going to walk off to his death and probably freeze to death out there in the snow. One thing we see here is another change of words in the tone. We see the word lost, bewildered, fatigue, sleep, death. So definitely a change in the feeling from the author so that you know that nothing good is happening to this group right here. Okay. Then we move to section 4, and I want to pay particular attention to the figurative language that's used. So go ahead and take a minute to mark your text like you see in the picture. This is section 4. This is the last part of the story that you have in front of you. So the questions that you want to look at are, what tool is underlined in green? So let's look at that. By this time it was 3 p.m, and consequently it was not very long before night came, and not with a lingering twilight, but with a sudden shutting down like a cellar door, as it is the habit in that country. So in this case he uses the simile to describe what it's like when the sun sets up in the mountains. He says that light goes away like the sudden shutting like a cellar door. So he's comparing the sun going down to what happens to light when a cellar door is closed. And then finally the next tool underlined in purple, let's look at that one. The snowfall was still as thick as ever, and of course we could see not 15 steps before us. But all about us the white glare of the snow bed enabled us to discern the smooth sugar loaf mounds made by the covered sage bushes. And just in front of the 2 giant grooves, which we knew were steadily filling and slowly disappearing wheel tracks. Here, you want to ask your teacher about imagery. The picture of a smooth sugar loaf mounds made by the covered sage bushes. I did it again, bushes. Just in front of us were 2 faint grooves, which we knew were the steady filling and slowing disappearing of wheel tracks. Images you can probably see. You've seen pictures, or you may have seen a snow covering up a bush and how it looks like a big mound, or wheel tracks in the snow, what those look like. Okay, so you want to know, how do these details help the reader understand the story? What is the main hole that the author wants you to fill in about why he's written this story? And finally, think about a theme that you've read about. So most likely the change here is they have seen in the snow some tire tracks that they can follow now. They know someone's been on this path again, but they understand that they need to hurry because the snow will fill those up if they don't follow them quickly. Okay, so take a minute with your teacher and talk about how the figurative language helps you create an image in your mind, helps you make a comparison so that you understand what's going on. And most of all, how does this make you have to fill in a gap? For example, the author didn't tell you that the sun set quickly and that darkness came upon them very fast, he makes you fill in the hole that, hey, if you close a door, then light goes away quickly. So you have to make that connection. Okay, so talk through these bullet points here on this slide, making sure you understand how that's happening, and then think about a theme. How did what happened to Mark Twain on this mountain, how can it be a part of something that could happen to you in your life? For example, do you know someone who says they know everything, but they're proven wrong all the time? Or how someone feels like they shouldn't be a part of the group anymore, so they leave on their own, and it's dangerous for them to do that. And finally, what little hints in life are given to you when there's trouble in your life? For example, the figurative language of wheel tracks in the snow is do people in your lives leave you little hints on which path to follow? And sometimes time is the main ingredient to make sure you do that, so that those trails don't go away. So a lot of figurative language, a lot of filling in of holes there for you. So think about a theme and talk about that with your teacher. The last thing you're going to do is I have a set of questions you're going to answer that you're going to use your text to answer. And after you realize that you think through a literary nonfiction as far as a story about something that's happened to a person, and they're writing about that memory because that memory has taught them something, and in turn they want to teach that lesson to you. If you'll read it through that, you'll be able to